Okay, we're here today with Michaela Chamberlain, whose new book on resisting women captured my attention as soon as I heard about it. And I'm so glad that you could be here to talk about it and talk us through some of these ideas that you introduce.
Oh, thank you. It's an absolute joy to be here and a real delight. Thanks for getting in touch. And I'm glad you enjoyed my book.
And I will just briefly introduce you here. Michaela Chamberlain trained at the Bowlby Center and studied in the psychoanalysis unit at UCL. Shortly after qualifying at the Bowlby Center in 2016, she started teaching Freud and attachment theory and became chair of the center. She worked as an honorary psychotherapist in two NHS trusts for several years, has presented clinical papers at public forums, lectures internationally, and has been published in various journals. Her debut book, Misogyny in Psychoanalysis, was released in June 22, which explores the historical and current context of misogyny in psychoanalytic theory and clinical practice. She's in private practice in London as a psychoanalytic psychotherapist and is a supervisor and training therapist. So, lots of knowledge there. And as we discussed before we started recording, I thought your book did a wonderful job of making all of these topics and studies approachable for a general audience. And I will ask you to help do that through this conversation.
I'll try.
Thank you. Well, you write in your preface that therapists and analysts sit with people every day who've been and are traumatized by patriarchy and misogyny, from which some people profit. And so psychoanalytic institutions have failed to train therapists to sit with people and understand and make sense of that trauma. So are you arguing there that, like many other institutions under patriarchy, that psychiatry actually profits from the pain that misogyny causes?
What I'm arguing for is that psychoanalysis, there's been, which is the reason I wrote my first book, there's been a complete blind spot around misogyny. So within these great tomes, these huge people that we know of, Freud, Winnicott, Klein, the kind of big hitters, and also even more recent writers, there's been um, there's been some kind of theoretical inroads into what misogyny is about, and more recently, there's been a lot more interest in it. But there hasn't been any sort of view as how does misogyny impact psychoanalysis as a discipline and as an institution. So, is there misogyny within psychoanalytic institutions, for example? That has never been thought about and addressed. And so that was part of what I was arguing for. It's kind of like, how come we're doing these trainings? The Bowlby Centre offers a very progressive training, and lots of other institutions do as well, thinking about race, classism, ableism. But yet there's this blind spot when it comes to thinking
Mm.
about misogyny. And yet this is a field that is female dominant. When you look at the writing and you look at the people who are in the leadership of these institutions, no, it suddenly goes more male, which is really interesting when you
Mm.
look at, who have these people been in charge and why. There's something going on here. But even in the absence of thinking about it, because psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, right? The whole deal is you're thinking about the unconscious, you're thinking about what's not being said here, but yet misogyny isn't being spoken about. So that's what really gripped me. And in the same way as, you would think about when you're meeting with somebody and thinking about actually what is this? And depending on your flavor of psychoanalysis and how you've been trained as well, there'll be different things that are at the forefront of your mind when you're
Mm.
practicing with somebody, when you're doing your work. But how is it constructed? As in, what is this woman experiencing coming in and sitting down opposite me? Whether I'm male, whether I'm female. What does that mean? What about the power imbalance? You often having women coming in, sat in front of you, if they've gone through institutions, education, medicine, for example, then they're used to being in an environment where men are telling them how it is. And so, what does that mean when you're suddenly sat in front of you as an analyst? Where's that power dynamic? How is that being addressed? And how are you thinking about that as an analyst
Mm.
yourself? So those were the key questions that I'm talking about that sort of haven't been addressed, and is the harm that I think is
Hmm.
caused in it just being
Yeah.
absent.
And you mentioned during your book launch at the Freud Museum a few weeks ago that women are angry due to internalized misogyny, which I
Mm,
think that's something my audience can definitely relate to. That's something I hear so much and read so much about now, especially women like in their 40s and 50s now are just enraged by the fact that it's so obvious everywhere you look and yet ignored by so many people. And you
mm,
said at the book launch that some women actually were or are misdiagnosed with borderline or bipolar disorder because of this rage due to internalized misogyny. Um, and you also write in your book how new mothers are sometimes diagnosed as having postnatal depression when in
mm.
reality they're just frustrated with the imbalance of labor at home. So, is this one of the repercussions of misogyny being ignored in psychotherapy, in your opinion, these misdiagnoses?
I think there's been a real absence of thinking about women's lived experience. So there's been a lot about thinking about psychosexual development, so the internal world of what's going on for a woman, which largely theoretically has come from a very male perspective. Whereas what's missed is actually women's lived experience. And it really struck me when I had my children, for example, and I was going to, baby groups. And one by one, and I started going to these baby groups when my first child was, I think 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old. We had a lovely health visitor who kind of said, oh, we're running this group. Do you want to come along? We invite all new mums, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, great. Went along to it and had this lovely kind of cohort of people that I'd met. And then gradually, one by one, as their partners went back to work, you would notice that their partners would go back to work. You'd see people's moods starting to dip, getting more, miserable and tired and
Hmm.
exhausted. And then the prescriptions of the antidepressants started to go up. Whereas there's something that seemed just blatantly obvious in that this isn't an internal problem here. This isn't a kind of something lodged within the woman and the mothers. There's something quite obvious in that they haven't got help. They're tired, they're exhausted. So surely there should be a kind of systemic approach here, as in actually maybe, if the mother's going to the GP saying, I'm so tired, I'm so exhausted, I just can't find any joy in what's going on. Maybe there needs to
Hmm.
be an intervention to go, well, could you come along with your partner? Could you come along with whoever's supporting you? Or we need to think about what support you need. But instead, I think in the prescribing, it gets difficult in that it's a very clear prescription stroke label on where the problem is. Whereas actually, maybe some mothers are going, my partner's not showing up enough. And
Hmm.
there's stresses, it's not to say, the partner may well be needing to go to work and doing that. But I think where it gets a bit blurred because of how motherhood is valued, it's not seen that actually the mum has just done a 12-hour shift. When you're coming
Hmm.
home at 6 o'clock, she's been going since 6 a.m., probably through the night as well,
Hmm.
breastfeeding, bottle feeding. And so she's just done a massive shift. And then you're coming home going, well, I'm tired. I need to rest. Where does the mother get that break? But
Right, right.
which is a patriarchal society. But instead, it's not kind of going, well, maybe there's something up with the dad as well, in that he's tired, he's overworked. Maybe he's depressed too. He's getting fed up. Instead, it just gets lodged with the woman. And that's, I think, a real failure in that that's where it instantly goes to that the mother is not thriving. The mother is struggling. And yeah, the mother's
Hmm.
struggling, but that's not because she's not a good mother. It's because the whole
Yeah,
system around her isn't functioning.
yeah, yeah.
And so I think
I mean,
that's
I
where the
think that
misogyny, yeah, please.
that speaks to I won't ask you to diagnose any people you don't know or haven't treated, but it seems to speak directly to the Lindsay Clancy case ongoing in the US right now, where I think a lot of the argument is that she was overlooked or disregarded by the doctors that she saw and maybe wasn't taken seriously enough when she presented with the symptoms she had and could that be maybe related to what you were just talking about that women and mothers in particular are expected to just sort of do this
Yeah.
incredible task without complaint or problems.
Hmm. And that's the double bind, isn't it? Is that we expect women to know how to be mothers. And, I know the amount of thought I put into it, and most certainly other mothers that I know, and working with new mothers as well. The amount of work and study that they're putting into this and reading and thinking about it and talking to other mothers, it's equivalent to doing a doctorate. I mean, it's massive in terms of the educational bit that they're having to do because many of us aren't brought up in those kind of communities where you're taught how to look after a baby or have elders around who might be able to help. That just isn't there anymore. And I think there's a real gap in sort of understanding where women are coming from in terms of what they're having to do, of how hard this job is. And of course, the thing is, if you do it well, it's taken for granted. So you don't really get any
Mm,
plaudits for it. You don't get any acknowledgement. Oh, you're working really hard. If you do it badly, well, yeah, everything comes down on you because you're not
mm,
doing your role as a woman and as a mother. So you're in this horrible space where it's not acknowledged. And I mean, and thank goodness to what Lisa Jones done and other people, around matrescence and thinking about what that transformation is in motherhood. There's growing awareness. I'm not so convinced how much that has fed down into the systems yet that need to be
mm,
there. And it is changing, but there needs to be more thought about women's lived experience.
mm. One thing I've noticed as I've aged is that I do feel angry about misogyny, but I didn't feel that way when I was younger, even though I was aware of it. And I think that is probably because I was still benefiting from it in a way that I don't now as a woman in my 40s. And I joke with my friends that I feel like I'm just completely invisible to everyone now, which has been freeing, but it has made me more aware. Um, so if no longer being an object of desire has helped me see the true effects of misogyny and the patriarchy more clearly, um, when I was reaping the benefits of it, even while I suffered as a younger person.
Mm.
Is that something? I mean, I feel like I've read a lot about that from other women my age, feeling this rage because of it. But is that something that you've observed that like the anger comes maybe as you stop feeling the experiencing the benefits of being, a desirable
I mean,
person to men?
it's a really interesting journey, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if you've got thoughts around why in your 20s and 30s, other than benefiting from it, as to why you didn't notice it. Because you kind
Hmm.
of see it, you know it's there, but you turn away from it, which is
Yeah.
really interesting, isn't it? But yet in the 40s, there is something, or even kind of late 30s, I'd say, kind of mid 30s, where there's a bit more of a shift where people are kind of questioning it, women question it. And I think there's sort of lots of things physically, hormonally going on in that time frame for women that
Hmm.
changes things. And also the sort of focus on where you're at and whether in your 40s you're achieving a lot more independence than maybe you had earlier
Mm.
on because there's a bit of I think it's almost a bit of deprogramming that needs to go on, that I think you do get through your 30s, where you kind of go, well, I've sort of been on this treadmill and I've kind of ticked a lot of boxes. And I think this goes on for men as well, it goes on for all people. It's sort of as you get to your mid 30s, you go, well, I've sort of done the things I'm meant to have done. I've gone to college, I've got the job I was meant to get. I've, pleased mum and dad in the way that I thought I should do.
Mm.
I've had the family. I've done all these things that I've been told, society has kind of told me this is right. And then you go, and then what? Which
Mm.
is a really interesting turning point, I think, for all people, because I think it's a real moment where you go, but is this making me happy or not? And I think for women, there's a really key bit in that for some women who've ticked all those boxes, they're the kind of like going, but I'm still not off the hook. I'm still got all these pressures on me. And why? Because I know I've ticked the boxes. Whereas
Mm.
before, you're kind of got this pressure that you've got to keep going, you've got to keep going, you've got to keep going, and then you'll be happy. And I
Mm-hmm.
think at
Mm-hmm.
that point, there's maybe a bit of a turning for women when they've got more experience. They've come out of the sort of patriarchy as well. And you actually go, no, I have got this right to sit at this table. So why are you still treating me like that? Why are you still treating me like I was in my
Mm-hmm.
20s? Like, and in your 20s, you can kind of go, oh, it's because I don't know enough. You've got excuses.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've fed a lot of excuses. Whereas in your 30s, you kind of get, no, no, I have got the experience now, but I'm still being talked down to. I'm still not getting that promotion. And I think you get a bit more clarity of going, I'm just as good as them. Why aren't I doing it? Or you have more experience of being around other people who will ask for what they want. And you're going, why don't I? What's stopping me from doing it? And so there's a shift. I don't know if that speaks to sort
Yeah,
of
I
your
think
experience with it.
that does make a lot of sense. I mean, when I say that I wasn't angry about misogyny when I was younger, it doesn't mean I wasn't aware of it. I definitely
Yeah,
felt it. Um, I I worked in a diner and in a biker bar, so I mean, I I felt that a lot
yeah,
from 15 onwards. But I guess I think you're right. There were plenty of experiences at work where I felt sort of diminished that I was able to write
mm,
off as because I'm younger, I'm still learning, I'm still working my way up. But maybe I think now the same thing happens. And I think, well, that's completely uncalled for. I've been doing this for long enough. I know what I'm talking about. I shouldn't
mm,
still be talked down to.
mm.
So I think, yeah, maybe it is this something that evolves with experience as well.
And I think there's a bit in that there's a sort of your confidence, the self-esteem grows, I
Hmm.
think, but also perhaps there is something in this too that there is less need to feel protected or reliant on somebody else,
Mm.
that you gain in a sense of independence, that you're not willing to play the game anymore, or you start to want something more that is actually
Hmm.
genuinely satisfying, or you realize that there are other relationships, because we're all sold that the ideal relationship is a heteronormative, cisgendered, get with a man, get a family, that's solidity, that's security.
Hmm.
And then I think when you go, well, I've done what you said was going to be great. And actually, I'm still finding a few problems here. This
Hmm.
isn't some happy ending. So I think there's a natural process where you start questioning these foundations that you've been given. And then I
Hmm.
think when you're in that relationship too, you might look back a bit on your parents' relationships and go, well, that wasn't okay. That didn't feel right. And maybe
Right.
mum and dad, their relationship wasn't quite the way that I saw it, that mum was nagging dad all the time or moaning at dad. Maybe dad actually was a bit emotionally absent. And
Hmm.
that's what was upsetting mum. And that's what she was trying to get me. And so you sort of have your perspective changes, I think, and
Yeah.
you get fed off it. And you also, I think, the bit that is really important in this is you have a moment of realizing your own internalized misogyny, that you kind of go,
Hmm.
oh, actually, I've been thinking this about other women.
Yeah.
I've been thinking they're a bit moany and clingy, and actually, all they're asking for is to be emotionally met. And
Hmm.
yeah, I've been carrying that, or I've been thinking, oh, a woman can't do that. It's
Hmm.
me who's been holding myself back. And you have a bit more confidence to go, no, I'm not going to do that. But also, I think you have a lot more tools, a lot more of a skill set to go, I'm not happy with this. And I know I'm not happy with this. I'm not going to be gaslit into thinking it's because I'm being difficult, which is the
Hmm.
usual trope that when women speak
Right.
up, they're difficult. And you kind of go, no, I can see that actually I'm making sense here and you're not. And so it
Hmm. Hmm.
changes the
Yeah.
terrain a bit. You've
Yeah.
got more to
You
think
give
about.
a great example in the book, which I loved, the Hemingway short story, Hills Like
Mm,
White Elephants,
mm. It's a
where
great story.
essentially the narrator is nagging his partner
Mm,
about not having an abortion, or does he want her to have one? I can't remember which way around it is. And he just won't leave her alone no matter how many times she calmly asks him.
mm.
She does
Yeah.
or says she doesn't want to have the conversation, and how yeah, that flips the script on the man being the one nagging, and still it's the woman who's treated as having some sort of outburst.
Yeah, that there's something wrong with her in it. And I think that is the bit, isn't it? It's like, I mean, I think the psychoanalytic idea of projection is really helpful, where there's bits of ourselves that we don't like, we push into other people. And it's,
Mm,
that sort of sense of, oh, she's the one who's annoying, she's the one who's unbearable. Whereas actually, he's just been completely unbearable. But yet
mm,
she has to hold that, she has to hold the badness. And I think a lot of misogyny is around that. That it's like these unbearable parts of men. And that's
mm,
why I think there is that trope of that women are clingy, women are needy. It's actually men going, oh my God, what if she does need me? What if I need her? That's
mm,
terrifying. So actually, she's the one who's being really difficult. So let's just push that away. Let's pretend that's not there. She really needs me. Because actually, if you really need somebody, it's quite it can be a bit of a balm to think, oh, she really needs me. She really needs me. She's really clingy. She's really kind of like, in my space,
yeah,
to kind of go, oh, it's okay. I'm never going to lose her because she really needs me.
right,
But
right.
actually, it's the man going, I really need her. But it's the woman who becomes difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I think we'll come back to that a little bit about the men's neediness, but I want to talk more about mothers, since this is the Bad Mothers podcast, and
Yeah.
how all this might tie in, if at all, with estrangement. So you gave a presentation for Seed Talks and you described Edward Tronick's still face experiment. Can you briefly explain that for our listeners?
So Ed Tronick, a psychologist who did this experiment where basically you have an infant, maybe about 7 or 8 months old, and they're in a little high chair in front of the mother. And the mother and baby, and you can look this up on YouTube, there's lots of clips of like the experiment happening. And so the mother and baby are interacting very happily, the mother's responding, mirroring what the baby is doing, going goo goo goo, chatting along. And then all of a sudden the mum goes blank, literally just goes and stops responding to the baby. And so you see, and it is really painful to watch because you see the baby start going into kind of like trying to get the mum back, trying to sort of go, oh, and like animate and trying to kind of, get mum's attention, get her back. And the more it goes on, the baby becomes completely dysregulated. So you see the baby then kind of like really getting frantic, trying to get the mum's attention, getting nothing back, and then ends up crying and the arms are flailing and it's sort of just completely all over the place, kind of falls apart and unravels. And then the minute the mum comes back, soothes the baby is kind of collected back up and can be there. And in my first book, I link that to Marina Abramovich's piece, Rhythm Zero, where she performs this endurance piece, a performance artist, Maria Abramovich. It's like really early on in her career, she's like 26 or something. And so her piece is she is in a room. Behind her, there is a table with numbered objects over it, which range from honey, a feather, a knife, a pistol, bullets. On this table, there's a whole variety of things on it. And importantly, above the table, she writes words to the effect, I am responsible for whatever goes on in this room. And she stands in front of the table, and that's all she does. And people are invited in, and she doesn't respond visually to anything that anybody does to her. And it ends up, and she ends up being kind of spread out on the table. They take off her clothes. She ends up with the gun against her head, at which point the guard actually intervenes and grabs the gun and throws it out. Somebody pierces her with a knife. It's really horrible. And you can see the stills of what's being done to her. You can see her face, even though she is not responding, just looks awful the way she is treated. And at the end of it, I can't remember exactly how many hours it goes on for, but I think it's about 6, 7 hours. She suddenly becomes animated and moves towards the audience. And they run, terrified, because this woman
Mm,
that they've effectively been abusing come towards them. And I think there is this, I use it as a sort of example of what happens when women don't respond to not just men, but other women as well. That there is this unraveling that goes on, that there's this intrinsic thing that as mothers, we're meant to respond. And and babies need us to. They find themselves in our faces. That's how they know their sense of self and who they are. And so there's this thing that is intrinsic and kind of meant to be, I think, that was basic around women that we have as infants. Women are there to mirror us, to kind of catch us, to see who we are. And if you don't do that, then you're difficult. You're not a good woman. So
Mm,
in adult relationships, if the other person hasn't gone through the kind of stages of development and maturity and gone through these kind of phase of understanding their dependence on women and what it is, that if they're still stuck in this phase where actually I still want a woman to be my mother and to be the person there, if you're not stepping in and picking the person up and being that kind of one who go, yeah, I get you. Yeah, completely. I'm here for you. Oh, you're upset. Yeah, I'm here. I'm going to nurture you. Then there's this hostility that can build
mm,
because you're not being, A, you're not being a good enough mother, but B, you're not being a woman. You're not doing
mm,
what
mm-hmm.
women are meant to do. And so there is this unraveling and this kind
Okay.
of
Okay.
complete um, lack of coherence that can
Mm,
take place and which can lead to hostility and anger and aggression, which
yeah.
is what you see
Yeah.
in Marina Abramovich's piece.
Okay. Yes, I see. I actually was thinking about the still face experiment from a different angle, which I want to ask you
Mm,
about,
yeah.
and then come back to the
Please.
Abranovich piece. But so the podcast is Bad Mothers, and we talk about mother-daughter estrangement.
Yeah.
And when you described that still face experiment, when I first heard about it, it just made me sick to my stomach. And I looked up some of the videos and had the same reaction.
Mm,
And I think, I'm guessing here, I think that has to do with my my mother's usual reaction to any time she was upset or angry with me was to give me the silent treatment, and that was from
okay.
as long as I can remember. So I think I was relating that to the blank face,
Mm,
right? The
mm,
and the experience of the baby desperately trying to regain the mother's attention because I think that's what I was sort of conditioned
yeah.
to do when I had the silent treatment. I had to find a way to win back her attention and affection. And that went on for years and years until we're now estranged because basically because I stopped trying and she, was in a silent treatment phase and it's just gone
Yeah.
on for decades now. So I wanted to know if you think that it are those things related? I mean, I understand from what you explained in the book from Donald Winnicott that mothers are meant to eventually detach, right, and allow their children to become more independent and not be so focused on them, and that's part of healthy development. So how does
Yeah.
all that fit together? I mean, is what I experience similar to the blank face experiment or the still face experiment, or do you think those things are different?
I absolutely can see the link between them, and it is such, I really feel for you describing it because it's such an awful place to be, isn't it, when you get the silent treatment?
Hmm.
It's kind of because the thing that generally as humans we don't like anxiety. We don't like not knowing what's going on
Hmm.
because we can fill that gap with anything we want to. So we can
Yeah.
imagine all sorts of things as to what the person might be saying, what they're not. I mean, if you think of how we're wired in terms of neurons, it's kind of like mirror neurons. It's sort of like that mirroring bit is also you're getting information the whole time about is that person happy? Are they okay with what I'm saying? How are they receiving what I'm saying? Oh, I get
Hmm.
to know what's going on inside their head because it's a bit scary when you don't know what's going on inside the other person's head precisely because you can go, I'm feeling a bit nervous, or I'm not sure about what I just said. Oh my God, are they thinking that? Are they really hating what I'm saying? So this in silent treatment, it's so painful. I mean, it's excruciating. And it is exactly that bit, I think, that you're talking about, where you go into overdrive to really get the person back, particularly when it's a caregiver, because we need them,
Hmm.
they're hugely important to us. It's like they're fundamental for our survival, particularly when we're small, that, we're reliant on that person to get us through. And the thing that is hard in this, which there was another psychoanalytic idea called the moral defense, which is Fairbairn's moral defense, which is kind of as small people, what we do, and when we're like really young, we don't blame the big people, the adults, for something that's gone wrong because that would be catastrophic. So, as a child,
Yeah.
a really young child, if you went, oh, yeah, my mum's doing that, she's not responding to me because actually she's got this whole problem going on, and you sort of philosophize about, well, she's, got this traumatic childhood, which means she can't reach out and blah, 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 whatever the story is. But that would then leave you as a small person going, I've got no grown up to help me. So the idea is that you go, this must be my fault because that's
Hmm.
safer because you can rely on the big people being safe. So you go into overdrive. You want to get that person back. You want them to really help you. And so that bit, I think, completely relates to the still face in terms of what we do. And that just pull, that sort of heartbreaking pull of wanting
Hmm.
somebody back. I think the bit that is difficult and gets sort of intertwined here is sort of trying to see things from different perspectives as to what's going on and why is that silent treatment it's effective, we know why it's effective, but also what are the other resources that the person didn't have to pull on,
Yeah.
but that's the thing they are only capable of pulling on. What is the fear behind it as well?
Hmm.
That is, that it's a better place to not speak to somebody than it is to be vulnerable with them and go, I miss you and I want you to be there.
Hmm.
What are the other factors that are around that make something? It might be that actually that person can never think about that. And in some respects, you have to cut off to save yourself. But
Hmm.
there's what has gone on for that person in particular when we're thinking about women and mothers that is so unbearable? Is it actually what's so unbearable? I'm not talking about your mother, I'm talking about in general,
Hmm.
that can be to sort of to cut off is more bearable than to think I'm not a good enough mother or that I
Hmm.
failed as being a mother. And I think there's huge weights in that, and particularly if we're thinking intergenerationally about what
Hmm.
it meant, we're able to have these conversations about how hard it is being a mother, about understanding things like postpartum depression, understanding,
Hmm.
difficulties in breastfeeding and bottle feeding and all the judgments and stigma and that men need to show up. Generations before us, that was huge stigmas around mental health, huge
Yeah.
stigma around needing help, or not knowing what to do with a baby. That I think is still very much there for older generations about not being a
Yeah.
good enough mother.
Yeah. I was thinking that when you were talking about the moral defense, in that it took me until probably the last 5, 6 years, I think, to look at that relationship with my mother
Mm,
with more empathy, I guess, for her and think about, I think I was always aware of, for lack of a better word, the baggage she brought into our relationship. But I didn't, I didn't really grant her any empathy for that, I guess. I just expected her to sort it out and
yeah,
be a better mom to me, which isn't unfair. I think that
yeah.
that's what mothers should do. But I think now I can see that probably at the time she was having children and coming of age, her options were much more limited. She probably didn't think a lot about if she wanted to be a mother or when she wanted to be a mother. And yeah, I can see all that now, and I do feel for her, and I don't hold any grudge or animosity toward her now. But I do also feel like, she hasn't evolved in a way that makes it possible for us to have a healthy relationship.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bind, isn't it? It's really difficult growing up and sort of, I'm not just talking about being a teenager, but kind of, going on beyond that. It's really hard in that there's a bit of us that you need to really not get your parents. You need to really not understand them
Mm,
in order to leave home. Because if we really did, if we were all kind of like mini therapists for our parents, then you'd never leave them because the guilt and the burden of it would be too much. And we'd all
Mm,
be buying into, I really need to fix my parents. I really need to sort this out. And for some people, that is the case, that it becomes more that they feel really burdened and they feel that,
mm,
that they're stuck in this place of I need to sort them out. But there is a bit that is important in going, yeah, but I also need to lead my life and I need to move on. And I think if
mm,
we were to really identify as we're growing up with our mothers in particular and what they'd gone through, then it gets quite hard to individuate and separate. And I think you need
yeah.
that time to then be able to go back and kind of reassess things. And that's the bit you have to work out, isn't it? It's like, can you actually meet each other as adults? Can you
Mm,
this be an adult daughter, adult mother relationship? And sometimes that's not possible. Relationship
mm,
relies on the two people. It's not always the case that that's possible. But I think there's something that is um, difficult in terms of growing up and thinking about the teenage view and what is fed of mothers to
mhm,
teenagers, what's fed in terms of patriarchy, as to how mothers are viewed as the warriors, as the one that are overcautious, as the ones that are holding us back, as the ones that are difficult. And dads are the ones who are actually more rational and can kind of encourage our freedom loving side and independence.
mm,
And I think there's something whereby it's almost kind of pushed into family dynamics that, of course, you need to reject the mother. She's the one who is irrational. She's the one who's over emotional. Whereas the dad is the one who you need to listen to because actually he knows. Whereas what gets missed in that is maybe dads don't need to do the worrying and thinking about, is it safe? Is it okay? Who are they going out with tonight? Where are they coming back? What's going on? Because they've
mhm,
got somebody else in the family already doing it. And
yeah.
they're doing it because the dad isn't doing it, but the dad's never been socialized to do that. So,
Yeah.
whereas the mum becomes the figure of the sort of neurotic, annoying character who needs to be pushed away from. Whereas
Mhm.
actually, maybe there's something that could be seen differently, as in they're the person who are thinking about your welfare, and maybe the dads need to pick up a bit of that as well, which I think is
Mhm.
shifting within family dynamics. And of course, all families are mum, dad. But I think there's an extra strain that sometimes can be put in terms of the mother's role, particularly with teenagers and teenagers growing up,
Yeah.
that is difficult, really difficult.
Yeah. You explain in your book that Winnicott argued that the role of the mother has traditionally been that of the object that has to survive destruction by the other, which is
Mm,
I'm happily child free. And I think it's because I've always kind of seen motherhood that way. A baby would absolutely annihilate me. But part of your argument in the book is that Winnicott and others overlooked the possibility that mothers might feel this way, or colonized is the word you use, by the baby because of how these institutions treat mothers and almost strip away their identity apart from being a mom, even before they have the baby, just throughout their pregnancy. And you said that because mothers lose this sense of autonomy, that whole experience might connect to previous trauma that
mm.
the woman experienced, and then that is a whole thing she needs to deal with in addition to becoming a mother. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, Winnicott is great in that he comes along in terms of kind of psychoanalytic theory of like really placing the mother absolutely central and kind of really thinking about her. And he writes this other paper where he writes a list of reasons as to why a mother will hate her
Mm,
baby. And which is really interesting list, but there is nothing about how the external impacts on the mother. So nothing about yeah, and that's one of the papers in my book, one of the chapters in my book is actually I give a list of all the reasons why a mother might hate her baby, but it's to do with not having support, not having sleep, all the
right.
expectations placed on her and what she's meant to be. And Helena Vissing writes really well around somatic trauma and around actual previous trauma that women might have experienced that come into play once having the baby. So even if you think in the process of giving birth, how your body is suddenly I had this, you're suddenly referred to as mum. Your name goes. So you'll have healthcare professionals referring to you as mum, which I found very strange, particularly with my first child, because I wasn't a mother yet. I was
Mm,
pregnant, trying to get my head around all the stuff that you know intellectually and you've been brought up with, but you're still going,
hmm
this is kind of insane that this baby is growing inside me. There is something that is quite strange about all this, that you can actually produce another human. And so there's something just on an everyday that your body is colonized because you're suddenly become in service of this thing. Your identity is kind of stripped out. Now, if you have previous trauma before that, which I would argue most women do, around your body being touched by men in an unwanted way, by being looked at in a sexualized way without actually asking for it, that even, 8 a.m. morning, walking down to the tube, underground, wherever you are, that a man will look at you and you understand that it's a sexualized gaze you're being looked at,
mm,
but actually that's not invited. That's an intrusion. So suddenly, if you're then in the place of you're being examined, medically examined as well, it's an intrusion. And how
mm,
that is done, whether consent is sought properly, whether it's genuine consent that is being sought, or rather than, oh, I'm just going to examine you, here's my name. It's like,
mm,
actually, you're
hmm
doing something that's really intrusive and invasive here. And I need to know exactly what this is about,
Yeah.
whether that is thought through. But if you have additional trauma on top of that, if you have sexual trauma, if you have physical trauma as well, then you're suddenly in a very vulnerable position. And so there's a gap there that for many women can come up, and people identifying um, with a female body or not identifying with a female body can come into place as to what happens, as to how you're treated medically, how you're
mm,
treated by other people around you, that those previous traumas come back to life and are
hmm
revivified. So you revisit them. And that's the potential and the real care and attention that needs to be paid to around that, around
mm.
how that is done. So I don't know if that speaks to what you
Yeah.
were thinking about.
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you. Um, I wanted to ask about estrangement. Um, I assume it's not part of your book, but I assume as a psychoanalyst, you are aware of the so-called trend of family estrangement.
Yeah.
And first, since I have you here, I have to ask, since it's often asserted in the media, but it has not been my experience or anyone I know, um, if you would ever advise a client directly to cut off contact with the family. Because, like I said, it's not something anyone I've interviewed who is estranged has experienced, but it seems like constantly in the news we're hearing, the therapists are telling all their clients to just stop talking to their parents. And I don't think that's true. And I wondered, since you are one, what do you think of that?
I think the bit that speaks to for me is the real risk of when power is not checked within a therapeutic relationship, and what is actually
Mm,
being acted out there if there is a need for an analyst to go, you need to do this or you need to do that, because there's something infantilizing in that to begin with.
mm,
I would see my job as not being around me making decisions for people at all. That's not the job of a psychoanalyst. The job of a psychoanalyst is for you to explore what's going on for you and for the two of you to understand it together and to think about what is going on, what's getting acted out, what might be happening if you're staying in a relationship that is actually abusive, and what is going on for you, and maybe naming it or seeing what is going on, how it's felt, thinking about those power dynamics, and then thinking about why is that person being in that relationship? What is functioning there? What, you might say to somebody, how would it be if you were to cut off from them? Or I'm having this feeling, but
mm,
let's work with that. I think giving a clear directive to anybody in those times, unless it's around safeguarding, but if it's around safeguarding, then that's another process that needs to happen anyhow.
mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the bit around, I think it's quite interesting, the sort of reporting around going, oh, therapists telling, their patients to do X, Y, or Z. It feels like there's a sort of, there's a kind of phobia against therapy. It's kind of like, is this what's really going on in therapist room?
Mm,
Whereas, and if you think about the vast majority of people accessing therapy are women, maybe actually what they're talking about is, are they getting frightened that women are thinking about what they want to do and making decisions for themselves? And are we actually taking that away from women and going, oh, it's because the therapist has told them, because they're not capable of
mm,
making those decisions for themselves? So I think there's an underlying misogyny in those
yeah,
conversations anyhow. In they're kind of going, oh well, clearly the only way they can break away from mum or dad is because another mum or dad has come in to tell them that women
yeah,
can't make these decisions themselves.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, in therapy, I've never had anyone tell me what to do, which, I mean, it's kind of the joke, right? Is that
Yeah,
you are sort of looking for guidance in a way, but it comes from within through those conversations. And I think anyone who's been through it understands that you don't get told explicitly what you should do. So that's
yeah,
part of
and
the
but
process.
there's a good reason for it though, isn't there? As you know,
Hmm.
having been through it in terms of the process, in that if somebody tells you what to do, they're telling you what is good for them. And
Hmm.
this is always the bit that when people are giving advice or saying this, the bit that's really interesting is, oh, actually, strip yourself out of it. They're talking about themselves. They're telling you what they would do in that situation, which is quite interesting. It doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily mean it's good for you. We're all
Yeah.
individuals. We're all doing different things. And that's why if I were to go, oh, I would do this, and I might say, I would do this, to kind of go, how does that make you feel? Like, what is in this
Mm.
conversation, kind of as a sort of provocation to kind of
Yeah.
go, well, let's think about that. Like, what's going on here? That
Hmm.
that I might be feeling that and you're not. Like,
Yeah.
where are the feelings going in this? Which is interesting. But I think the minute you're in the business of telling people what to do, you've lost interest in them and you've
Mm.
lost curiosity about what's going on, or you're also disempowering them as to whether they might be able to make those decisions for themselves, which is the more
Yeah.
important bit and the more interesting
Yeah.
bit.
I have so many more questions, but I think I'll just go with these last two in the time we have left.
Yeah.
So you wrote, going back to the Winnicott claim that the mother has to survive the destruction of the baby, you explained that, quote, a sense of the fragility of the infant's ego has meant that for both the mother and child to survive, the aggression has to be tolerated. And you liken this to the way that women are taught to tolerate men's aggression due to men's deep fragility. As women, we spend so much time tiptoeing around men's feelings for our safety. And it's
Yeah.
funny, I thought of this Margaret Atwood quote before I got to the part in your book where you
Did
actually
you?
quote her. Men are afraid women will laugh at them. Women are afraid men will kill them.
Yeah.
Where do you think that men's fragility comes from? Is it from that first, I think, is it Freud that makes that argument that they have to reject the mother because they can't be so reliant on someone? Do you think that that's where that fragility comes from?
I think it's a really good question. And I think for different men, it's different things. But I think there's an overarching thing. If you look at the work of Gilligan and Snyder, and Carol Gilligan has particularly done a lot of work on this in the States, is around thinking about how boys are socialized from when they're small, so that boys have to go through a process of proving masculinity in a way that girls don't. Girls don't have to prove their femininity, they're taken as such. And so there is a bit for boys that even from really early on, from like, age 5, 6, that they're taught in school, they have to be part of a group. And like the worst thing is being kicked out of that group, because then you're not kind of proving your masculinity. And you can't be with the girls because then you might be thought of as being feminine. So, which is a really
Mm,
interesting way of thinking about it, as to,
mm,
that group thinking, and even kind of in the language and the sort of there's lots of research done around the language that is used even in kindergarten with boys and girls. In the girls are kind of rewarded more for saying I don't know or laughing, whereas boys taught to give an answer, even if it's the wrong answer. That's,
Mm,
if you're a boy, you speak up. Whereas a girl, it's kind of like, no, it's like, quieten down. It's okay, kind of
mm,
input a bit. And I think that sense of self being brought about through a group leads to fragility in its own right.
mm,
And
mm,
I think there's also that bit where patriarchy's done, which is that fear of women, which if you kind of, whichever sort of way you want to think about it, there is a thing about that women have to be disavowed. They have to be thought of as less than, because if not, you're not strong and powerful. And so
mm.
if you think about if your sense of self is built on that, it's quite a fragile sense of self. If
Yeah,
it's built
yeah,
around a repudiation rather than actually who
yeah.
I am, who I like myself to be, what are the good things about me, which I think it's shifting,
Mm,
people are more aware of it. But I think if your sense of self is built around actually, I need to be better than, that's going to be a fragile sense of self.
yeah, yeah.
And so how people are socialized, I think plays a huge part in it.
Okay. You mentioned in the book that researchers Gillian and Snyder had a paper placing the myth of Psyche and Eros out as the way out of the patriarchy, in that in that myth she stands up and sort of breaks the rules of that are confining her. And
Mm,
that made me think about, this is maybe a long aside, but my dad and I are close in spite of my estrangement from my mother. And he has six daughters. I'm the oldest, and he's a retired police officer. So my whole life, he has been advising me on ways to stay safe and to protect myself from
mm,
bad guys.
mm,
And it's only in the last few years, probably in the same time where I started getting angry about misogyny, that I sort of reject these ideas that or this advice, because I don't think it's my job to keep myself safe. It's men's job to not kill me.
mm.
And as an example of this, the other day I was telling him how I was walking my dog in a park, a wooded park that I go to a lot, but I was on a path that isn't very popular, so it's quiet. And a man turned up a few, 10, 20 yards behind me, and he was alone and he didn't have a dog, which is kind of weird. Almost everybody's
Mm.
there with friends or walking their dog. And it made me a little nervous, but he stopped and he said, "Good morning." And he said, "Is it all right? I'll just pass you." And he went off ahead of me. And I thought that is exactly the kind of interaction I want to have, because he acknowledged that I might feel a little uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and he wanted to make me feel more comfortable and did the generous thing there. So I was telling my dad about this, my point being, here's a man who's taking responsibility. And my dad said, "Why were you on a path that isn't well populated?" So we're just not getting each other's perspective, I think. And so I wanted to know, from your perspective and considering that paper and the myth of Psyche and Eros, um, am I being too naive in my approach to hopefully one day eradicating misogyny?
I don't think, I think we should always be optimistic to do it because things are shifting and they're changing. But I think that what that speaks to me of what you've just said is actually there's a bit, I think, for women, and perhaps for all of us, that we have to almost dissociate from misogyny because it's too painful. And we
Hmm.
have to dissociate from the threat because if not, how do we go out of our doors each day? You know, if you were to really take on board statistics and attacks, etc., then how possible is it to speak to a man when that threat is
Yeah.
there? So there's a certain dissociation that has to happen because it's almost unbearable to think about it. Whereas your dad perhaps doesn't have to dissociate in that way. So he immediately goes to that. And also his experience is going to be slightly skewed as well, in that that's his work, that's what he does.
Hmm.
But I think it's always really interesting. It's really difficult. What you've made me think of is paper by Camille Paglia, where she writes about rape. And it's a really hard read, and it's a really hard read to read in kind of current context. I think she wrote it in late 80s, early 90s. And she was quite provocative feminist anyhow. But she writes this thing about, if you're a woman and you're going to a frat party and you're turning up expecting to not be raped, then and she says something really quite unpleasant about you just completely stupid. And
Mm,
it's really hard read because the current climate is it's on men to not attack. And of
mm-hmm,
course it is. But then there's the bit that you also have to go, but we know they do. Some
mm-hmm,
men do. And we know how prevalent rape is. So actually, do we go in with this blind faith going, well, it's on them? Or do we go, actually, I'm not going to accept your behavior, so therefore I'm not going to turn up where it's likely it's going to happen? But I think
mm,
it's a really, really difficult place to be because I think we all want to dissociate from what happens to women. I
mm-hmm,
mean, just look around the world. I mean, look at what's going on in Afghanistan. Who's doing anything
mm-hmm,
about that? Where's the outcry?
mm-hmm.
Where are people not raging every day? Look at all the violence against women around the world. I mean, I'm just mentioning Afghanistan. So many countries. Look at the UK. Look at the rape rates in the UK, domestic violence rates.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to really take that on board, it's almost unbearable. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a real challenge when it comes into your day to day. When you're going, I don't want to live like that. Why should I have to think about that? And why should you? Why should any of us have
Mm-hmm.
to think about that? But then there's also the reality of it too, which is
Yeah.
really hard to take on board.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's naive, and I don't think we shouldn't be optimistic, and we shouldn't ask for change and
Mm,
demand change because it's amazing, isn't it, what we've put up with for so long? I
yeah.
mean, it's astounding that women haven't rioted,
Really.
isn't it?
Yeah. And I hope that the, recent backslides in um, reproductive rights for one, but just generally how women are treated in the US and in for one example, um, I hope that the recent memory of all of those gains will spur people to recapture them rather than just, sort of give up and give in. It's hard. It's hard though, because I feel like the attention on it is dwindling, and is focused on other political topics instead. So
I
I'll
think the
try to
bit that
remain
is
optimistic.
yeah, but I think the bit that is optimistic in this is the bit where it's not dependent on what men are doing in a certain respect, and it's not
Mm,
dependent on patriarchy. In that, if you work on internalized misogyny, then actually you can free up a lot more space.
mm,
There's a lot more on the hard drive there if you're not fighting your own internalized misogyny. And if you can really work on that and really think about actually what's holding me back from what I want to do,
hmm,
what actually helps me to speak out on what I want, then there's something where you can kind of not be so suffocated by
mm,
patriarchy and misogyny, because I think there is something that is deeply suffocating, and that's the point of it, is to almost kill you off with the misogyny. Whereas actually, if you kind of go, well, I'm rejected, I'm not interested in it, I'm going to do what I want to do, which is the great thing with
yeah.
getting older, I think, as you're talking about, kind of in your 40s. Okay, yeah, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm just doing what I want to do. And there
Hmm.
is a freedom in not having that male gaze the whole time, which I think is very oppressive. Of going, actually, I don't need your gaze. I can do other stuff. Let's
Right.
meet in a different place. Let's have a different kind of relationship here.
Hmm.
And let's
Hmm.
be more one on one, because that'll be a relief for both of us. Because that's the real thing, isn't it? That's the real hit here. Patriarchy is not great for men either.
Yeah.
There's a freedom in kind of equality and looking at women's rights. There's, that burden can be lifted.
Yeah.
So let's
There's
share the
something in it
load a
for
bit.
them too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That was, maybe half the questions I had for you, but that will have to do. Again, the book is on resisting women. Um, Thank you again for talking to me about all this.
No, thank you. Thanks for such great questions as well. Been really
Thanks.
interesting. Thank you.